Hi friends, I hope you are all doing well. Today I'm going to read for you a story from the Jesus Storybook Bible. This is what it looks like. And it's going to help us understand a little bit about what happened in the days before Jesus died on the cross for us. So this story is called The Servant King, and it's about the Last Supper. And what they used was from Mark 14 and John 13 through 14. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. It was Passover, the time when God's people remembered how God had rescued them from being slaves in Egypt. Every year they killed a lamb and ate it. The lamb died instead of us, they would say. But this Passover, God was getting ready for an even greater rescue. Jesus and his friends were having the Passover meal together in an upstairs room. But Jesus' friends were arguing. What about? They were arguing about cleaning each other's feet. Yes, that's right. Cleaning each other's feet. Now, the thing about feet back then was that people didn't wear shoes, they only wore sandals, which might not sound unusual, except that the streets in those days were dirty. And I don't just mean dusty dirty, I mean really stinky dirty. Everything went through those streets, including animals. So you can imagine the stuff on the street was pretty yucky. Anyways, when people came to have dinner, someone had to wash away the dirt. But it was a dreadful job, and nobody wanted to do it. So who on earth would ever dream of volunteering to do it? Only the lowliest servant. See? So it was common for them to wash their feet before they would sit down for meals and dinner coming into the house. But like I said, the lowliest servant would be the one that would do that for them. Because it was such a disgusting job, nobody else wanted to do it. In the scriptures, the disciples aren't actually arguing over it, but you can imagine when they sit down to eat, they are probably each wondering who's going to do it because they themselves don't want to do it. Okay? I'm not the servant, Peter said. Nor am I, said Matthew. Quietly, Jesus got up from the table, took off his robe, picked up a basin of water, knelt down, and started to wash his friend's feet. You can't, Peter said. He didn't understand about Jesus being the servant king. He didn't want Jesus to do it. If you don't let me wash away the dirt, Peter, Jesus said, you can't be close to me. Jesus knew that what people needed most was to be clean on the inside. All the dirt on their feet was nothing compared to the sin inside their hearts. Then wash me, Lord, Peter said, tears filling his eyes. All of me. One by one, Jesus washed everyone's feet. I'm doing this because I love you, Jesus explained. Do this for each other. So here he is washing feet. Now, Jesus wants us to serve one another. And he's showing them that sometimes serving other people isn't going to be exactly what we want or think it's going to be. Sometimes it's going to be yucky and dirty. But if we humble ourselves and serve other people, meet them there, we get to see wonderful things and how the Lord will bless them and also bless our lives. When we do stuff like this, we're showing how much we love other people, how much we love the Lord, and how much we want to serve him. Okay, so he does that before the supper. Now, one of Jesus' friends had made a bad plan. No one else knew what the bad plan was, but Jesus knew, and so did Judas. Judas was going to help the leaders capture Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Go on, Judas, Jesus said. And Judas got up from the meal, left the room, and walked out into the night. So this all took place during this Passover meal. I'm sure that everybody was surprised when they found out it was him. Then Jesus picked up some bread and broke it. He gave it to his friends. He picked up a cup of wine and thanked God for it. He poured it out and shared it. My body is like this bread. It will break, Jesus told them. This cup of wine is like my blood. It will pour out. But this is how God will rescue the whole world. My life will break and God's broken world will mend. My heart will tear apart and your hearts will heal. The Passover lamb, just like the Passover lamb died, so now I will die instead of you. My blood will wash away all of your sins, and you'll be clean on the inside in your hearts. So whenever you eat and drink, remember, Jesus said, I've rescued you. Jesus knew it was nearly time for him to leave the world and go back to God. I won't be with you long, he said. You're going to be very sad. But God's helper will come, and then you'll be filled with a forever happiness that won't ever leave. So don't be afraid. You are my friends, and I love you. They sang their favorite song, and then they walked to their favorite place, the Garden of Gethsemane. And here's Jesus telling about the supper, about the bread, and about the wine and what those represent. Okay, so here's something we were talking about at the very beginning was the Passover meal. And it said something about how the Israelites were saved from their slavery. And because of the Passover, because of that time, they celebrated Passover from that point on. So even Jesus, growing up as a boy, would have celebrated the Passover for when, in the last plague, the plague of the firstborn in Egypt, the angel of death passed over and protected the Israelites. But they had to do something special for that. They had to take a perfect lamb and do it without blemish, which means that it didn't have any deformities or anything wrong with it. And then they would take and sacrifice it. And then what they did was they put the blood over the doorposts, like this in the picture. Do you see the blood over the doorposts right here? So when the angel of death came through, it would pass over them. That's why it's called Passover. And then after that, God said, celebrate this so that you always remember when I saved you from the Egyptians. See, this is the Pharaoh right here. So hundreds of years later, people were celebrating the Passover, even in Jesus's time, because Jesus was Hebrew. He was part of that group of people that would have celebrated. But this time, during this specific time period, Jesus would be doing that same thing, except he would be replacing the perfect Passover lamb for himself. Because, see, Jesus was complete and perfect too. Do you remember he was out in the desert for 40 days and he did not sin? He had to be perfect and whole to be able to sacrifice just like that lamb was. Otherwise, the sacrifice wouldn't mean anything. Jesus had to be perfect. So they have their meal and they're sitting there. And he finds out, the disciples find out that there's somebody among them that's going to betray them. And that is Judas. So leading up until that point, Judas had met with the religious leaders and said, what will you give me for turning Jesus in? And they said 30 pieces of silver. And so he said, done. So during that time, they find out that Judas is the one that's going to hand Jesus over to be arrested. And Jesus announces it. He doesn't keep it quiet. He says, one of you is going to betray me. And so he lets Judas go. I'm sure that Jesus was heartbroken about that, but he knew that this was part of God's plan in saving the rest of the world. I'm also sure that the disciples were probably pretty shocked that somebody who had been with them as a part of the 12 disciples for that long would have been the one to hand Jesus over. And ultimately, they were afraid for their lives too, because if you followed Jesus, you were now part of that category of potentially being in danger. So that's something else part of the story. All the story kind of comes together, so we see all the pieces for how things are going to work. Another part of what we read was about how Jesus washed the disciples' feet. See this right here? Now, the Storybook Bible tells it in story form. It's not exactly the same way that the scriptures would say it, though. Jesus tells them that he wants them to be like him. He wants to serve. Jesus did not come to be served. He came to serve others. He came to show them his love and God's love. Now, Peter was like, no, Lord, you can't do that. I'm not going to let you wash my feet. And Jesus says, Peter, you need to be cleaned beyond your feet. Your heart needs to be cleaned. I need to show you how to do that so that you can do that for others as well. Now, Peter goes on and he gets to become one of the leaders of the disciples after Jesus goes back up to heaven. It's something really cool because sometimes we may not feel like we need to be cleaned, or we may not feel like, no, you shouldn't be the one doing that. But in fact, we need Jesus to clean us so that we then in return can help serve other people. Okay? And finally, we talk about the Last Supper or the Lord's Communion. Okay? Now, they had their food, their Passover meal, and in the middle of this, Jesus breaks bread and wants to show them something special. And he says, "Take this bread and remember me. Take this wine and remember me." Now, what he's doing, he says the bread is broken, just like my body is going to be broken. And as we pour out this drink, my blood will be poured out, but it will be to save you. My body will be broken, and my blood will be spilled so that it covers, like the Passover lamb, it covers over all of those sins so that we all may be saved and be able to live a life with him. Because right now, the sin separates us. Sacrifices had to be made to atone for the sins. But when Jesus dies on the cross for us, that will be the final sacrifice, so that when we choose to follow him, we won't have to make other sacrifices. Jesus was the final one for everyone. So we still do communion today. We do them in churches all over the world. We can do them at home with our families, especially while we're home. We can do them with our churches if our churches are offering them to drive through and pick them up. We as believers can come together this Easter season and take communion and remember that his body was broken and his blood was shed. And we do that out of remembrance of what he did, out of worship and praise and honor of what Jesus did for us. Okay? Now, the next story that I'll read for you guys in another video is about the Garden of Gethsemane. So I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!